For more on that, I want to talk to a guy who understands the ocean better than most. He's John Konrad, the CEO of G Captain, a former drill ship captain, and the author of Fire on the Horizon. John, great to have you with us again, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Always. Okay, so I was following you have a thread on X today on this subject that I found fascinating, where you talked about that it is actually possible to pull a lot of water from the ocean and get it on top of these fires. Tell us what is possible here.
Absolutely. So you have to go back in history to the great San Francisco earthquake in 1905. And the Navy had this novel idea in 1906, '07. They said, what if we put a firefighting pump on a boat? And the Navy was actually drilling on these fireboats out in the bay when the earthquake struck. And, earthquakes don't affect boats. But what happened is all of the fire main pumps and the piping and everything else, it broke during that earthquake and the fires erupted. And all of those docks along the shore, they were all made of wood and they started catching fire and the firemen had no water. So someone came up with a brilliant idea. A fireboat is basically a mobile pump. And they brought the fireboats in. They put a hose under the dock to the fire trucks. Fire trucks beat their way out. And most of the city escaped via ferries because of the water provided from these fireboats. And this is what's most frustrating. Like, we don't seem to be learning the lesson. Same thing with the Maui fires. We have a watercraft, we have landing craft, we have fireboats, we have Coast Guard cutters. We don't use it. If you go to the Library of Congress, there are stacks of manuals and books teaching you how to do things like this. But it seems to be forgotten knowledge, and nobody's reading those books today.
Yeah, and, when we think of fireboats, I've seen the images. I saw some on your X thread today where you're looking at a fireboat projecting a stream of water, say, up onto a ship or onto a dock like you're describing in order to put out a fire that's somewhere either on the water or near it. But you point out that it's also possible for these fireboats to be used as pumps to feed water inland, right?
Absolutely. That is their number one purpose. Like in San Francisco, my dad worked on the fireboats in New York City and used to tell me it's about cargo pumping capacity. So right now, Long Beach has two relatively new, built in 2017, massive fireboats. Then they have the sensors, the FLIR systems. They have a hospital on board. They have all the communication gear, but they also have these incredible pumps. So those two boats together can pump 80,000 gallons of water every minute. So they can fill up an entire Olympic swimming pool in just 8 minutes. And people have talked about using helicopters. Well, helicopters, it would take all day for a helicopter to empty a Olympic-sized pool. And you have the big planes that drop water. Those are great, but I think they have like 1 to 2,000 gallon per trip capacity, where these fireboats can pump 80,000 gallons a minute.
Yes. And now,
shoreside.
We've been There's been a lot of people debating why the fire hydrants were failing to produce the water that was needed to address these fires as they have been raging this week. And one of the explanations we've heard from California is that the water pressure dropped and there wasn't enough sort of backfill, enough water coming inside of the system to keep that pressure high. What you're discussing right now, would it be possible to keep that water supply flowing and that pressure high if we were pumping water out of the Pacific?
Absolutely, 100%. That's what these boats were designed for. Again, going back to 1908, this is a lesson that we learned, and it's super frustrating. This is a lesson the Biden administration has particularly failed to learn. We had the massive ship, the Bonham Richard, catch fire in San Diego. Now, people think fireboats went to save it. No, they had these tiny little police boats that are meant for marina fires, and they were shooting water up, but the firefighters on board that ship, same exact problem. They didn't have enough pressure in their fire hose, because when you have big fire, you have multiple fire trucks, you have multiple fire hoses, and it's those multiple teams attacking at once that drops the pressure. So that's if San Diego had a proper fireboat. We have hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer Navy ships and facilities, and there's not a single fireboat in there. And then the Secretary of the Navy and Biden's CNO came back. They did a whole study, and they said, well, tugboats can do this job. Well, tugboats are needed for to move ships away, to move supplies, and they're not trained firefighters. They have a much lower pumping capacity. So we just get this thing, it just keeps coming back with the government. And it's not just the Biden administration. The Army has this joint logistics ashore ability. So they have these big oil tankers that can fill up with the water,
Yeah.
and they can park off the shore, and then they can send a barge, land the barge on the bridge, and they can put pipes up into the mountains, and they have booster pumps up. Well, our friend General Mark Milley, when he was Chief of Staff of the Army, he sold the majority of the Army watercraft equipment at auction. So this is the same equipment, same type of system, but the petroleum side that we used in the Gaza pier.
Yeah.
And we know that disaster ended up killing 3 Americans and completely failing at its mission.
Unbelievable.
So, we just don't. I would love to say put the fireboats there today, but without the training, without the support from the federal government,
Yes.
even if they went with my plan, it would be a disaster. But hopefully Trump fixes this and increases the training budget.
So Mark Milley sold off critical gear. I wonder if China told him to do that. Anyway, we'll get back to that. But the expenses that are involved here, John Konrad, I wonder if it'd be possible to afford it. California has been trying to install high-speed rail for no reason whatsoever. That project has exploded to well over $128 billion in expenses. What kind of money do you think we might be talking to get some of this critical infrastructure up and running?
Well, like I said, some of it is there. Like these fireboats, they're existing. We paid for it in Long Beach. We don't have them in San Diego for our most important Navy base, but they're in Long Beach. But the money isn't there for the training, and particularly these firefighters. LA cut estimates between $17 million and $24 million from the fire department budget. Well, what's the first thing that always goes is training. And my dad, a firefighter, says you rise to your level of training. So if you're not training with this fireboats, if it's sitting pierside because you
Yes.
can't afford the fuel and you can't afford the overtime and you can't afford the training instructors, it might as well be useless.
One of the things that I've seen, I asked openly this question yesterday. I was curious, why can't they use this ocean water to douse the fires? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And I'm obviously you're in a much better position, which is why we're having you on to talk about it. But some of the responses I've seen from people are that, well, salt water is not useful here because it has some sort of long-lasting damage. In other words, it would literally salt the earth. It would prevent vegetation from regrowing. And additionally, that salt water is so corrosive that it would destroy the pump systems or something. These are the types of explanations I've seen. What concerns do you have about the use of salt water, if any?
Well, we'll start with the corrosive of the pumps. There are 50,000 ships in the world right now. They're stale ships on the oceans, and they pump salt water every day. Now, the fire department equipment is not designed for trucks, but after you're done, you flush it with the fresh water. You will lose some equipment. Some of it may be ruined or rusting, but would you rather lose a few fire trucks or 24 houses? So I don't think that's a very good argument. The salting the earth has a little bit of claim behind it, but this is the thing. This is how deep into our consciousness this environmental,
Yes.
some of the environmental garbage has gone. These are coastal communities. So I've hiked these mountains when there was a strong onshore wind. You can taste the salt in the air, that it's being sprayed up. And even if it wasn't, they say, well, if you salted the earth, it may not, the environmentalists are saying it may not come back for decades. Well, you have 100-year flood every year. You have tsunamis every couple 100 years. And those forests have survived. It will kill the invasive species. But these coastal communities and the coastal ecosystem
Yes.
is very strong to resume. What they're not capable of recovering from is all of the microplastics that come from burning a house down.
Right.
Unfortunately, my dad died of cancer in the late 90s, and the reason was my grandpa's fire department generation, it was burning wood. They had no respirators. And later generations, they had respirators. But my dad's generation didn't know. And between that and 9/11, they had more casualties from cancer in 9/11 than any other generation, the FDNY. So you burn a house, the environmental's there. And then you
Big
had
time.
the real nut jobs who are saying you're going to suck minnows up into the fire boats. Well, there are 50,000 ships in the world sucking minnows up. Are we just going to end all ocean commerce because
Exactly.
of that?
Yeah,
It's
no.
ridiculous.
And you're right. Anybody who lives in a shore community knows that that comes with the extra burden of that salt corrosion, whether it's to your car or to your house. That's one of the primary considerations that you're constantly dealing with the impact there of that. Also, I noticed in your writings today that it's possible to desalinate water to a level that makes it more useful, but not necessarily drinkable, right? Like we have desalination that makes water drinkable, and that's pretty intensive. But you can kind of get to a middle ground, correct?
Yes, but this goes back to how sad California is. So Morro Bay, the small fishing community in California, it's not as liberal as the other states. It's in the center, and they said when all these restrictions on, you can't water your lawn and all that, they built this large desalination plant because they had a natural gas, clean burning natural gas power plant right in town that gave them cheap energy. And they're 1 mile from Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And desalination and nuclear power are just, it's like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together great because the problem with desalination is that energy cost. So first, California, even though they're environmentalists, they shut down this clean burning natural gas plant to use coal plants inland, because what it really is these rich people don't want power plants on the shore, right? So
Right.
the coastal committee uh, killed that power plant, and they refused to connect them to the nuclear power plant. So here's a town, the taxpayers of this small town paid for this desalination plant. And when there were wildfires in San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly did the study, and they say, well, we can't, it's very expensive to make purely fresh water, but we can remove the majority of salt, and then we can put this water into aquifers and let the sand and the carbon and in these aquifers, settle out that salt water. And it was an excellent plan, but it was killed by these environmentalists again. So Morro Bay ended up closing the desalination plant. And the saddest thing about that is not the taxpayer, the local taxpayer still has to pay for all of this, even though it's closed. But that sent a strong signal to every other coastal community in California that wanted a desalination plant. Whenever it came up in a town meeting, in Huntington Beach or in San Diego, people say, well, look what the state did to Morro Bay. Those poor suckers are still paying for it. So it just, that's how insidious some of these politics are. Here's a town within a mile or 2 miles of a nuclear power plant when they built it all on their own,
Yeah.
and just, these state bureaucrats, environmentalists, completely shut them down.
Amazing. Insane, actually. John Konrad, really appreciate your expertise as always, sir. Nice to talk to you today, and thank you for being a guy who focuses on solutions. Good to talk to you, sir.